First of all, good morning on this very sunny and hot day. Hello Mercy, hello. I hope you've all managed to get out and see, hello Diane, so many nice friendly faces to see, well, on the screen. And I hope you've all managed to get out and enjoy the sunshine this week. It's been very, very nice, and I'm sitting here now very, very hot. So hopefully it's definitely weather for kind of walking along the beach this weekend. So today we are going to be talking about pronunciation, which is a favourite of mine, as some of you will definitely know already. And so we're going to be talking about why, mainly, so why we should focus on pronunciation, what pronunciation is and what we can focus on, and then also how we can do this. I'm going to be focusing on younger learners purely because I think that's a really critical stage in terms of pronunciation development, and also making sure that students at this age feel comfortable with practicing pronunciation in class. However, everything that I say in this in the webinar today will be definitely relevant for students of all ages. So it's not specific to young learners in the sense that you can't use the activities with other ages of learners as well. So thank you very much to Richmond, as always. So this is now the 7th, I think, in the series of webinars that we are giving from now until the end of term. And it's been so far a delightful experience. We've really enjoyed giving you all something to consider and something to think about on your Friday mornings. And hopefully in the next academic year as well, we'll continue to do this. So thank you very much to Richmond for collaborating with us on this exciting lockdown venture that we have started over the past couple of months. Thank you very much. And welcome to everyone. So the topic of pronunciation. The reason that I decided to write about pronunciation and to give a talk or webinar on pronunciation is because after years of observing teachers in CELTA, in classes as well, I realised that teachers just actively avoid it. No matter how many times I'm like, where's your pronunciation? Where's your pronunciation? It seems to be something that is always in my points to consider, whether this be with teachers who are doing an initial teacher training course or teachers that have been teaching for many years. It's something which comes up again and again and again. And often the answer is, when I ask why, oh, I forgot about that. Other things tend to take precedent over pronunciation. And so I wanted to find a little bit more about why this was. So what was the root of teacher reluctance, and also what I could try and do as a trainer to avoid this, and also then give this information to teachers so they just don't have to be as worried about it anymore, and to see that it's not something that's scary and actually can be integrated into every part of your lesson with every age and level of students. So hopefully after this talk today, you'll feel inspired to start integrating this into as many of your classes as possible. And then you'll make me very happy. So the first thing I have to show you is, okay, so this was a story which, or an anecdote, which one of the CELTA trainees that I interviewed a couple of years ago, she put in her application form. And it was to describe a positive or negative learning experience. I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to read through what she said. Okay, I don't know if any of you can identify with this type of situation. I know I definitely can. I remember one specific moment that will stand out in my mind forever, when I started my French degree, and on the very first lecture, we were all in a lecture theatre of 150 students, and the lecturer looked down the list of 150 students to pick the first person out to give an answer to a question in French. And who is the first person in 150 students? Oh, that would be me. And I remember just feeling like I wanted the world to swallow me up, because you were there, I was there on my first lecture at university. And the thing is, I was like, I just don't think the words will come out. The pronunciation won't come out. And it was the most, one of the scariest experiences I've had in a classroom or lecture theatre. I will never forget this. Don't ever do this to your students. Okay, but what does this anecdote tell us? This tells us really that when we're thinking about skills and different skills which the students have to present in class, pronunciation and speaking are something which are very personal and can actually evoke quite an emotional reaction to teachers. For example, if we say, can you read something out? Can you do this? Can you do this? Students find this quite difficult, and it's scary, and it provokes this kind of emotional reaction, which for this student, for this trainee, was, I thought I would hate studying English forever. It's something very personal. And it can affect us much more emotionally than other areas of language. And for that reason, as teachers, we have to view it differently in class, and how we approach it needs to be slightly different, because it is very personal. And also, it's not just like learning grammar. It's not just, okay, I've got it, that's it. Yes, I do some exercises, done. It's something which is built up over time, and confidence and feeling positive has a lot to do with it, because we feel relaxed. And so this is something which I think is really important when we consider pronunciation. It's not something that we can look at in the same way as grammar, because grammar doesn't have the same emotional connection. But pronunciation and speaking, it does have an emotional connection. And the way that we deal with it in class and the way that we present it has a big impact on how students will react to it themselves, and how much they'll try and how relaxed they feel. So this is, I think, a really important point to state right at the beginning here, before we look at the what's, whys and hows. So essentially what we want to avoid doing is laughing at our students. Okay, so we want to avoid being like, oh no, that's wrong, you got it wrong, ha 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 ha, you can't do it. Okay, and to avoid students feeling like, oh my gosh, she's asking me to do it again and again and I can't get it. We don't want to do this. We don't want to put our students on the spot. We don't want to make them feel vulnerable in front of their peers if they're not comfortable with that. We want them to feel comfortable, and pronunciation is something about feeling comfortable. And if we don't, then we tend to tense up, and of course then the mouth muscles won't work. It's like when you become nervous, you can't even speak in your first language. You can't get your mouth around the words, let alone in your second language. So we need to avoid doing this to our students and putting them on the spot. We need to create a positive learning experience and create confident speakers in class. Okay, remember, like I said, for younger learners, these are their formative years. If we can create an atmosphere of positivity surrounding pronunciation and speaking, and one in which they don't feel nervous, they don't feel bad, they just feel like giving it a go, and they don't mind taking a risk because we don't point and laugh at them, then this is something which will develop and will continue throughout their learning. So the formative years of pronunciation with younger learners are really important, that we create this good attitude towards pronunciation on the teacher's part, in order for the students then to increase and develop their English skills with this positive mindset towards that. Okay, so in doing this, I thought about the things that make a good class. Okay, so what makes a good class? A lot of energy, of course, knowledge of the subject, good classroom climate, like we said, the good atmosphere, appropriate pace for the students' level, graded language, so it's appropriate for them, awareness of their needs, personalization, high levels of student talking time, and well-prepared materials. However, this is something that we aim to put in our classes, but there is something missing. Okay, obviously we are in a webinar about pronunciation, so you can probably guess what it is. Okay, and this is pronunciation focus. Okay, and I believe that there should be pronunciation focus in every single class, no matter what you're teaching, to develop student skills, it helps in so many other aspects of their learning as well, which we'll see throughout the webinar. And so the development that you can, in confidence, in other skills that you can gain from practicing pronunciation in every single class, it just means that you have to have it in every class, an element of it in every class, in order to help your students develop in the way they should in their learning. All right, so this is kind of like the reason that I'm giving the webinar today. So I want to know now a little bit about you. So just by yourselves, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to have a look through these questions, and I want you to think about the answers, and then we're going to go through them in the chat. Okay, so I just want you 30 seconds, look at these questions and think about how you would answer them, and truthfully. Okay, 30 seconds, go. Okay, so just very quick answers in the chat if you've got anything specific to say. You don't have to write anything in if you don't feel like you've got something to say. The first one, does anyone ever worry about their own accent in class? People worry about this, yeah? I think sometimes, and actually this is can be the case for the natives and non-natives. Okay, so depends on the accent that you have. If you've got a very strong accent, then you feel often sometimes that you have to neutralize this in some way. Or sometimes you're just tired as well, and you feel like, okay, I need to speak properly. I need to make a real effort. Yes, I think there are days and there are days for sure. Some days you're feeling tired and your mouth just doesn't work very well. You have to make more of a conscious effort to pronounce things correctly and think about it. How often do you correct students' pronunciation errors? We've got some always here. This is an interesting one here. I try not to interrupt and let let it flow, which is interesting, and we'll talk about this later. Yeah, sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it is difficult depending on the stage of the lesson, definitely. How do your students react to pronunciation activities? Oh, pronunciation hospital. Okay, that's nice. So you do like a little kind of quick fire pronunciation correction. I like that. They're terrified. They feel terrified. They find weird the IPA signs. Yes, and actually we don't need to use these. We're going to look at the IPA a little bit later, even though I love the IPA. We don't need to use it because it can often scare students, especially our younger learners. It can scare them. They're like, what is this? It's useful for us, and actually it's useful for maybe higher levels, and you can use it with younger learners as well in terms of distinguishing between different sounds, but it's important that we don't overwhelm our students with this kind of codification of pronunciation when we can just do it in class and repeat it. Okay, is native-like pronunciation the goal of many students? Because of series, yes. A lot of students nowadays will come out with American accents despite never having been to to any American country? It says it's not necessary to correct. British series are awesome too. Yes, British. There's many more American series, let's be honest. And what do students aspire to be? They aspire to be this like cool American high school, you know. So they often come out with American accents. I'm like, where did you get that from? Okay, what material can you use to help practice pronunciation? Do you use anything? Songs, yeah, phonics is great. Oh, minimal pairs, yes. We will look at those a little bit later. Listening, songs, videos, definitely language games. Okay, specifically, where do we find these? Do we find them online? Do we find them in the course book? Where do we find them? Online, yeah. Some of them we can find online. The thing is that there are not many quality pronunciation books or pronunciation material that we can find, and we'll talk a little bit about this. But quality pronunciation material, just isn't a lot of it. So I think that we need to consider this, especially for younger learners. There just isn't a lot. Definitely a gap in the market for this. Perhaps we should develop something at some point. You adapt them, yes, you need to adapt them, but there's just not that many pronunciation activities that's relevant for younger learners, kind of ready to go activities. Yes, and in textbooks there aren't enough pronunciation materials. I totally agree. Textbooks are a lot of textbooks are weak in terms of pronunciation. Okay, thank you very much, guys, for your input. Okay, so again, a lot of doubts that we have sometimes about pronunciation. Sometimes we feel like, oh, I'm not sure if I should correct. Students don't react well to it. Parents want students to have this pronunciation. So it's really important as teachers, we understand that there is not a lot of agreement in terms of pronunciation, just because we don't do it enough, and course books don't focus on it enough, and there's not as many, you know, you've got hundreds of extra grammar books to choose from in the world and the market, but there isn't a lot of pronunciation extra material to choose from. And so sometimes for us it can feel like a bit of a stab in the dark when we're looking at what to work on with our students, especially for younger learners. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is show you two videos. And these are just two people speaking about different topics. As you're watching the videos, I would like you to think about two things. One, do you agree with what they say? And two, are they easy to understand? Okay, so we'll watch the two of them and then we'll discuss the difference between them. Okay, so do you agree with what they say? And are they easy to understand? Okay.
Everywhere you go as a tourist, people speak English, but when you've got a Scottish accent, that's very little help. I've run holidays and I've had people translate for me into English. And you walk into a pub and say, are you still serving food? Okay. Oh, he asked you, are you still serving food? Ah, see.
Okay, so that was number one. Very funny comedian if you ever want to laugh at a Scottish man. Okay, number two, go.
For 2 years you managed in Japan. How did the Japanese culture shape your philosophy as a manager?
Well, it made me more patient, more respectful certainly, and less aggressive. And it helped me as well to really learn what is important for me in life, because you take a distance a little bit with your hectic life in Europe, and you sit a lot on your own in a culture that you don't know. And usually I think it has a positive impact because it makes you more tolerant with people. You learn what you take for granted in your own culture is not necessarily the only way to live. And I must say I was very early confronted with that because I had the bicultural influence. I lived near the German border, so I had influence from the German culture, from the French culture, and it is very deep in my body, you know, that you have to accept any culture because there's good and bad in every culture.
Okay, so we've got the Arsene Wenger. So the two things I asked you to think about, do you agree with what they say? So the first one was sometimes he has to, with the Scottish accent, he needs to get it translated because people don't understand him when he speaks English in foreign countries. Sometimes this happens. If you have a very strong accent when speaking English, for example, going to a country, a foreign country, and speaking English, you really have to neutralize your accent so that people can understand you. For example, imagine a person that is from Liverpool going abroad and speaking English. I mean, we don't understand them very often. If they speak very, very quickly with a very broad accent, we can't understand them. So imagine going abroad and speaking to not proficient users of English. Is difficult for him. So sometimes people have to translate. This guy talking about, so Arsene talking about culture and accepting culture. Love him, great guy. So are they easy to understand? So just in the chat now, which one do you find easiest to understand? Mallorca, tourists pretend to be understood no matter what they say. Yeah. So the one we found easiest to understand, the second one, exactly. Okay, so my question is here, okay, we understand better the non-native speaker. He is much easier to understand despite having clear pronunciation features of French. So it doesn't really tell us anything about the difference between here, whether we have to have a native speaker model or a non-native speaker model, because it's all about something specific that we're working on, okay? So the goal here is not to sound like a native speaker, but rather to communicate effectively in a global context. And this is what we need to stress with our students. You don't need to sound like the American high school cheerleader. But what you do need to be able to do is make sure that when you speak to people in a global context in English, that you are understood. And this is very important because nowadays, more of our students, as we saw with Alex's webinar a couple of weeks ago, the majority of our students will end up communicating with other non-native speakers from around the world, whether that be on holiday, whether that be in work. So if they work in industry, perhaps they'll have offices in Germany, in France. The majority of our students who end up using English in their professional lives will not speak to native speakers. They will speak to other non-native speakers. Therefore, the accent that they have needs to be globally intelligible. Okay, they don't need to sound like the Queen. They don't need to sound like the person they've seen in their favorite series, but they do need to be able to be understood by other people. Okay, so in general, what do we think of? And I think we've mentioned this already. What do we think of when we think of pronunciation teaching? Okay, in general, we often look at this and we think about this. Okay, so those of you who've done the CELTA are probably like, oh my gosh, not this again. You may have nightmares about having to produce and transcribe different things for us, but it's okay, it's over. So many of you think about this. It's actually not that scary, and it's very, very useful from a teaching perspective, okay? It shows us the differences or how similar certain sounds are, like at and up, very similar because they're next to each other on the chart. So as teachers, it can give us a lot of information about different individual sounds and how we can help our students. So who created this? Do we know? Anyone who created the phonemic chart in this form? Anyone got the answer? Oh, I've got one. David, no. No. Okay, it is Adrian, Karen. This one I did actually. This is my version of it because I think the original one is not very pretty. So this one was my one that I made because I wanted to put the pictures on it to make it relevant for the students, and also for us it's nicer with the images as well. So it was Adrian Underhill that put this together, okay, and he does a lot of work on pronunciation, and he wrote a very useful book called Sound Foundations, which is a really, really good book if you want to learn a little bit more about pronunciation teaching and just in general how it works. So this is Adrian Underhill's efforts in trying to make sense of the different sounds and how they relate to each other. Yes, I will. Adrian Underhill, there we go. Okay, so Sound Foundations is a very, very, very good book. He also does a series of mini videos on pronunciation as well, which are great, and you can find them all on YouTube. I'm going to play you part of one now, in which he discusses one element of pronunciation, okay? And just as you watch, I want you to think about whether you agree with what he says. Okay, go.
Hello. What variety of English pronunciation should we teach? For me, the short answer to that is teach the pronunciation that you use. Teach your pronunciation in any way. You can't help it. So teach your pronunciation, whatever it is. At the same time, be aware of other pronunciations, other accents, and introduce your students to those, expose them to those other accents. And all of this goes for native or non-native teachers. Whichever you are, teach your pronunciation and introduce them to other varieties.
Okay, so here, I think the key thing that we need to take away from what he said is that it does not matter whether you're native, non-native, whether you think you have a standard or non-standard accent. The key thing here is knowledge and awareness. And what we need to do as teachers is to make them understand that it's not just our accent they're going to come across, but also other accents. And you can see this, for example, in a lot of exams these days and course books, especially in the Cambridge exams. You find that they're trying to put in a number of different accents in order to test students' understanding and awareness of the different accents too. So the more you can get that into your classes, the better, and just an awareness that sometimes we might pronounce things one way and other people might pronounce things in a different way. Okay, so it's really important to have knowledge, and we should always teach the pronunciation that comes naturally to us, because that is the way we speak. In an outside world, that is the pronunciation that the students would come across if we were to speak to them. And so we can't just say, oh God, my pronunciation is not good, I can't do it, because that is our pronunciation. We are the teachers, we are the model, okay? So don't worry. The pronunciation that you have in class is yours. Making sure, of course, that we are correct in certain sounds and that we don't teach things incorrectly. That's a different thing, okay? But pronunciation-wise, we need to make sure that we give them as many different tools to cope with different accents as possible. Okay, has anyone noticed this? Where does this come from? Where can we see this? Any ideas? Where does it come from? Recognize it? Oh, this Spanish? No, this is, okay, this is the, so for first certificate, when they do the speaking, you've got the assessment criteria. So this is the assessment criteria for the first certificate in English for pronunciation. So remember, you've got grammar, vocabulary, you've got discourse management, you've got interactive communication, and you've got pronunciation. And so in order to get full marks in pronunciation at a first certificate, this is what you have to demonstrate. You have to be intelligible, your intonation is appropriate, sentence and word stress is accurately placed, and individual sounds are articulated clearly. It's not easy to assess students' pronunciation, especially at this level of first certificate, because this isn't very, very guided. It's not very well directed, I don't think. And it's very difficult as a teacher to be like, okay, is that right? I'm not sure. Is that really good pronunciation? Because remember, it can't be perfect. It's never going to be perfect, especially with our younger learners. But the key word here, I think, that we have to take from this is intelligibility. Okay, so here, of speech and writing, the quality of being possible to understand. And we were talking here before about being understandable in a global context and communicating in a global context. That is key. Often in lessons, and especially when we're teaching the CELTA course, we speak about errors being corrected which affect intelligibility. And I think this is something that we need to consider as well in class. When we focus on something with students, the key things we need to focus on are things which can affect how intelligible a student is. So whether they are easy to be understood. Another point to bring up here is that as teachers, we sometimes become immune to students' unintelligibility. Because what we do is we understand them because we've been around them for so long, or perhaps we know that language group so well, we know the types of pronunciation errors that they tend to make. However, what we are doing then is we're saying, I understand you, but this isn't necessarily going to be true for people outside of the classroom. So we need to make sure that we're not just letting things slide in terms of intelligibility just because we understand it. So sometimes we ignore some quite big errors, especially in intelligibility, because we know what they're trying to say. So we really need to think about, okay, in an outside world, if they came across, I don't know, a Japanese person in the street and they were both speaking English, would that person be able to understand what my student is saying? If not, this is an intelligibility issue. Okay, so we need to really think about that when we're approaching pronunciation and especially error correction in our classes. So here we can conclude that, the important thing is not necessarily having an achievable target, but having a model that can be used in order to aid intelligibility. Whatever this model may be, okay, there has to always be something to aim for. And usually, for example, in a course book, the aim is therefore like a standard British accent or a standard American accent. That is not to say that the students have to then reach that, but there has to be a model because they're, you know, for example, in language, in grammar, there is always a model. In writing, there is a model. There has to be something to aim for. So in this sense, yes, we can show students, okay, this is the way this is said by this person, and that is your model, but they don't need to all strive to be exactly that way, and they don't have to be perfect. But that is intelligible, and those models will aid intelligibility as well. They need something to copy, basically. So for our students, and what if actually they want to be more than just acceptable when they speak? In the sense that, for example, with grammar, they wouldn't just want to be okay at grammar. Students would want to be really good at this. So what if some students really want to focus on their pronunciation and really want to sound like a native speaker? This is something which we can also work on in class too. So we shouldn't just accept okay. We should also strive to make our students better if we see that they are really working on it and really want to work hard on their pronunciation. However, when considering, okay, whether to work on pronunciation in class, the first thing we need to think about is what to teach, okay? And when finding out what to teach, we have to look to our students, because course books go through pronunciation in quite a random fashion. And it's not the same as grammar, as you just learn kind of in a series of different grammar points. Pronunciation is different for each person and different for each student. So in terms of guiding what we teach, we have to look to our students and to look to what errors they make in class. Okay, so the first thing that I would do is listen to my students. I have to listen to them to see what errors they are making in their pronunciation before I can think about how to help them and what to teach. So I've taken some words here which are commonly mispronounced and difficulties that there are some difficulties that a lot of students have with these words. So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds. You don't need to write anything, but I want you to look through and think about the difficulties that students may have with these words and why. Okay, so you don't need to write anything, but I just want you to think to yourself what problems your students may have with these words and for what reason. Okay, so I'm sure many of you are like, ah, yes, all of these words my students sometimes pronounce incorrectly. And I've chosen them for that particular reason. The key thing here is that we need to be reactive and not prescriptive. So we need to react to what our students are saying in the class in order to then work out how we're going to help them with the problems they have with many of these words. And we need to analyze the reasons that they are having problems with these words. It's not just to say, okay, these words, oof, they're finding it quite difficult, they can't pronounce it, I'll correct it and that's it, move on. I need to be more analytical as a teacher as to what's actually going on internally with that pronunciation so that then I can work specifically on that issue. So I'm going to take one of the words, teenager, okay, which I've heard mispronounced on a number of occasions. And these are the three aspects of the word which are often mispronounced. So sometimes there is a stress on the A phoneme. So instead of teenager, it becomes teenager. Okay, sometimes students find this particular sound quite difficult, the J sound. And this is across the board, I think. So it's often articulated as ya. So it often be teenager, yeah, rather than J. Then also you've got the typical, the ER at the end, it's unstressed. Therefore, some students give it its full value, instead of the weak form a. So these are three things which are happening here with the pronunciation of the word. So it might come out as teenager, which is quite often how that would be all three put together. So what can I do here? I can work on one of those specific elements of pronunciation which students often get wrong. A key one for me here would be the J phoneme, because this appears in many, many different words which students produce. So then I can create a task or work on something in class which focuses on this phoneme particularly. Therefore, I'm reacting to the errors that students are making and I'm helping them directly produce these words more accurately in the future. I'm not just taking some random activity which doesn't actually focus on the errors that they are making. So the key is here to listen to your students and the errors they're making, analyze why, and then use that to direct your activities that you create in class. Okay, so we know why it's good to work on pronunciation and what we can do, but do teachers do anything about this? And as I've said, when I observe, the answer is often no. Teachers often forget about it, or it's something that, oh, I meant to do it, but they don't. So I asked some teachers why they think we should focus on pronunciation. This is what they came up with. So this is just some of our teachers. This is what they said. When I said, why should we work on pronunciation? Just have a quick read. Okay, so it's obvious here that teachers understand the importance of pronunciation, but then when it comes to the classroom, other things tend to take over, and it's something that we often forget. And in terms of observing as well, I just don't see enough of it in classes, or it's something that, oh, okay, I need to put this in quickly, but it's not actually related to either what the students are learning or the errors that they are making. It's just kind of paying lip service to the fact that they feel like they should put some pronunciation in their classes. And so this leads me to thinking about why teachers are so reluctant in class. There was a study in 2002 in the University of La Trobe in Melbourne, and it was focused on teacher reluctance in pronunciation teaching for English language teachers. So he basically mentioned, so this is the guy that completed the study, and said it seems to depend, the effort devoted seems to depend to a large degree on the individual teacher. And this is true. It depends on the teacher and how they feel about it, and perhaps how they felt about it in the past, the training that they've received, okay? Some teachers just do it a lot more than others, but for what reasons? Okay, so one reason sorry about that. One reason that teachers may avoid using or practicing pronunciation in class is because this can cause embarrassment. So some of you might be thinking, yeah, I don't want my students to be embarrassed. However, I might also like to state that actually maybe it's us, we're the ones that are embarrassed. We're embarrassed for them because we think they're going to be embarrassed about pronunciation, but then it becomes like a really vicious cycle. So the real long-term embarrassment here is when they go into the world and they're not understood. So isn't it better that they are slightly embarrassed in class, or not embarrassed? Actually, we're the embarrassed ones. Isn't it better that we practice with this in class, so to avoid this embarrassment outside of the classroom? Okay. Another reason they might be reluctant to practice pronunciation is because they don't monitor, and monitoring is really important in classes. And how are we ever going to listen to the students if we don't monitor? We need to listen so that we can capture those pronunciation errors that they are making in order for us to work on those specific elements of pronunciation which they are struggling with. So monitoring is very important. And if you are a reluctant teacher when monitoring, you are never going to hear your students, and therefore it's going to be difficult for you to work out actually what you need to work on. Also with monitoring, you're not intruding, okay? That doesn't mean joining in with students' conversations. This just means going around, maybe sitting there, listening, okay? You are definitely, for monitoring, you can be actively monitoring, but not actively in the students' conversations. And that's one thing that teachers often struggle with, the concept. You can be active, but not in the conversation of the students. 3, and we spoke about this before, interrupting the flow. Okay, we don't need to be in students' faces the whole time to be able to help them, okay? If we're quietly monitoring, they might ask us a question, okay? So maybe students are speaking. If we're there and monitoring, students might be like, oh, what's the pronunciation of this? They might ask for help, which is fine. Also, in doing this, we can take notes and use this for delayed correction, or use this then to create some material or an activity at a later date. In order to work on pronunciation, we don't necessarily need to interrupt their flow, but we need to be there to listen, okay? And we can use this for the material that's produced from this, or the speech that's produced from this, we can use for many different activities, and it makes us more aware of the pronunciation issues that our students have. Okay, this one is definitely true. Sometimes we're just happy that they're speaking. We don't want to stop them, we don't want to upset them. They're speaking in English, woohoo! We've done our job. Okay, but what we want to do now is make sure that they're doing it well. All right, so yes, they're speaking, fantastic. Now let's work on that. Let's work on the speaking. Just speaking is great, but not enough. Okay, we need to work on these elements so that when they do speak, they can speak correctly, and this will encourage them to then focus on it a lot more. Make them even better at speaking and even more confident when speaking. Assessment. So here we've looked at assessment in terms of the Cambridge scale, which is quite difficult to assess students on that. What we should then assess students on is their improvement and their progress. And if we work on particular sounds, for example, like a j sound, maybe they couldn't produce it before in a word. After some practice, they can. Okay, the assessment then is, I've really worked hard on this, well done, you've progressed. So assessment should be on a more of an individual level, and this will really help students. Course books. As we've mentioned, course books are often rubbish. at including any useful pronunciation focus. There are only very few course books that I've come across which actually include it well. And so teachers often feel like it's difficult to fit this part of the course book into the class. And often as well, I mean, especially on the CELTA, I often tell them, leave that out and do it yourself, okay? Leave that exercise, that random exercise that's just kind of wedged into the end of a grammar exercise. Leave it out and do it yourself. Practice the pronunciation that's focused on that grammar. So often you have to create your own material yourself, and course books really need to improve in this area. They're often just stuck there to fill a gap. So you can use some of the elements of this, but it's important to integrate it throughout the class, not just stick it on at the end. Okay, resources. I don't know if any of you have seen this book, but this book is fantastic, but very old. So this is one of the best resource books for pronunciation by Mark Hancock, Pronunciation Games, but it's very old. And so the lack of resources is also a factor here. So we want worksheets to print off, we want things to help our students, but often we can't find them. And if you do find them online, sometimes they're not fantastic quality. There are, however, so Mark Hancock has released another kind of series of pronunciation books. But again, two pieces of work, two books, is it enough? Not really. We need much more in this area to help us as well as teachers. Okay, so with the resources too, there are resource books, but it's unclear the extent to which unclear to what extent other teachers currently exploit such resources. So yes, they're available, but we don't necessarily use them effectively when it comes to material or printed material. Sometimes we only focus on pronunciation when it becomes problematic. Okay, so we tend to mop up errors when we can't stand them anymore. And this is obviously not the way forward. We shouldn't just focus on pronunciation when it's something that we can't stand anymore because it's an error that they've produced so many times. If we do, then this is an error which is already fossilized. So make sure that at the point of learning, we work on pronunciation as much as possible. Okay, another thing, lack of training. And so sometimes we feel like we just don't get enough training on it. We get sometimes training on how to teach grammatical features. We get training on many, many other things, classroom management, but pronunciation is still something that we don't often get trained on and something which is often glossed over in many teacher training courses. So it's, you know, up to us to work individually and independently on how to solve our students' issues. And often you might go to a director of studies and they'll be like, oh, don't worry about that, don't worry, because our goal is often for students to pass exams. However, pronunciation is an element which is integrated into every single skill. Okay, and yes, I know it's not easy when, okay, I know it's not an easy feat. Students repeat the same errors time and again. They become uncomfortable. They don't take it seriously. Yes. We don't feel like we have the right accent ourselves. Some learners have poor sound perception, so they just don't hear it. We don't want to damage their confidence. Some students are resistant to correction, which is true. We have to choose which areas to focus on. We are not comfortable with some sound distinctions ourselves, and we feel self-conscious in class. Yes, I know it's not easy all the time, but this is why we need to work on it. Okay, and make sure that we feel more comfortable teaching something like pronunciation as we do about teaching vocabulary or grammar. And it's only by practice and incorporating it into our classes that we're going to feel better about it. Okay, and what happens if we don't focus on it? So there are a couple of things that could happen if we don't focus on it. This is a personal anecdote from one of my C1 adult students that I had a couple of years ago in class. And we were doing pronunciation because I love it in class. And he was like, I have never studied pronunciation in my life. And at my age, I'm never going to be able to change. It's too late. Wrong, first of all. But this motivation, because he'd never studied pronunciation before and he'd never had a teacher who'd focused on it, he was just like, super resistant to it. And so if we can get students to feel happy and comfortable with it at a younger age, then we'll avoid this at higher levels and at later dates or later on in life. So motivation issues can be a real factor if we don't focus on it in class. Physical issues. Okay, so it's also, pronunciation is physical. It's our mouth, okay? The tongue is the strongest muscle in our body, and when we speak, that's what we're using. And so if we can't produce certain sounds or certain words, it's because we can't work out technically where to put everything. And so these physical issues are something that we need to work on in class, because it's like saying, I'm going to go run a marathon, but I'm never going to train. Or I want to lift this really heavy weight, but I've never lifted any small weights first. So it's part of training. We need to train the muscles. And if we don't train the muscles in class, or we get the students to say something once, that's not training. Okay, so training is repeated. So getting your mouth to work in the way that it should on a number of occasions, so that we can recognize that. We have that muscle memory. Okay, and then recall issues. So when we focus on pronunciation, it also helps us remember. I remember in my year 7 French class, my teacher drilling this again and again and again for the word order of the negative of reflexive verbs in the past. And so I remember this still to this day, her writing it on the board and us just drilling it again and again and again and again. So in terms of recall, pronunciation also helps this, because we listen to it, we listen to ourselves saying it, and again, our muscles have that memory when we come to producing that language. So if you don't practice pronunciation, then your students might have certain recall issues with words or structures too. So what now? What can we take from this? We need to avoid prescriptive teaching. Okay, so just teaching because it says it in the book. We need to be reactive. We need to notice features of the target language. So if I'm teaching conditionals, what part of that would students find problematic? If I'm teaching vocabulary, which of the words would students find problematic? And we work on that in class. We need to anticipate problems and then find solutions. So when I'm looking at the work I'm going to be doing in class, what problems do I anticipate in terms of pronunciation, and what can I do in class? The better prepared I am, the more likely I am to focus on it in class. We need to practice consistently. It's not going to happen once, okay? One time does not mean that the students are going to be able to produce language perfectly. It needs to be repeated. Make it part of your classroom routine, okay? So students need to have this consistency, and little and often, just like all good things in life, okay? Especially wine, although wine a lot and often. Okay, so a couple of ideas now for you. Oh yeah, this was just one of the comments that one of the teachers made about what to do. How do I convince students that imitating Downton Abbey isn't the same as having good pronunciation? Good question. But we remember that we don't need to have always this accepted standard for students. However, if it's something which is motivating them and driving them to focus on their pronunciation, and they love Downton Abbey, then fine, let them have it. Okay, if they want to speak like a 19th century English lord, then perfect. So if they have something that a goal to work towards, it's motivating for them. Okay, but we don't need to enforce this. We don't need to force this upon them. But I just liked this. Okay, I can share, if you email me, I can share the PDF of the talk as well. So at the end, you'll see my my email address. If you want the PDF of all of the slides, then I will send that at the end. Okay, so Elba, you were saying you wanted this slide. I can send you all the slides. If you just email me, I'll send it to you. Okay. Okay, so a couple of things we can work on here, just for the end of the webinar. So minimal pairs, and I think someone mentioned these earlier. These are pairs of words in which one of the sounds is different. So for example, bag and bug. And this is a really, really easy way to work on pronunciation in class. We can have the odd one out. We can find common sounds. We can get students to stand up, sit down when they hear a certain sound. We can have them find their partners, so matching the ones with the same sounds or matching the ones that are the minimal pairs. this is a really good way to work on student sound perception as well. So for example, the and the are really, really common sounds within minimal pairs, which have a big effect on intelligibility. Okay, or our favorite bitch and beach, which is also can cause embarrassment for students. So minimal pairs, great way to work on pronunciation. Dictation. Okay, we might think of dictation as something quite old-fashioned, but actually dictation is so useful for pronunciation focus. It really helps students' micro-listening skills. I think in phonics, we use dictation quite a lot, but they don't necessarily need to be younger students who are working on phonics with. It can be students at any level. Dictation of difficult words, because in listening for those particular sounds, I'm more aware of them. And it goes hand in hand. If I can produce it, I can listen to it. But if I can't listen to it, I can't produce it. So it's all together. Okay, we could do lists of words, running dictations. We can do longer sentences and think about connected speech features. Use the language that you're studying in class. Don't necessarily think you have to find something apart from the work that you've already got and the material you're already using. Use what you've got in your classes and make the most of dictation. Bingo! Okay, so bingo is also a fantastic activity for this. We can take sounds or words that we're working on, and it's also a really good way here to work on sound recognition. You know, in the bingo grid, you can put ones that students might miss here, or sounds that you know students are having problems with. Therefore, it just makes them listen better when there's an element of competition to it. It means that they're more focused on it, because they're thinking, oh, which one's this? Oh, I'm really listening for it. So when they're straining to listen, it's really working on those skills and those listening skills that they need to be able to produce the language correctly. Chants. Love a chant. And this is something which aids recall as well. So, you know, we were saying before about my nice little French sentence that I still remember to this day. It's really useful for classroom management, but also for pronunciation. So students will you're not focusing on a particular sound, you're just having a chant of a certain, it could be, I don't know, put your books in your bag. That was my favorite one of all time that I did. It's like, put your books in your bag, put your books in your bag. Nothing except the students then would say it again and again, and therefore it's practicing those, working those muscles. So in having your classroom routine and having a chant in English at every part of that routine, the students are working on strengthening those muscles to produce those sounds from a young age, within a framework as well. Use your mouth, okay? Your mouth is your tool. And as I said, it's all technical. Pronunciation is technical. So if students can't feel what's happening in their mouths, then they're going to find it difficult to produce the sounds. So for example, you've got the ah. In doing this, you're like, okay, what's happening to my mouth? Ah. Okay, so you get the students to notice what's happening. If they can notice what's happening and see it with you as the model, they're more likely to do it correctly, because it's something visual for them. Okay, when it's something that they can't hear, it's hard for them to reproduce. But if you show them where to put their tongue, what to do with their mouth, okay, it's often like the th as well, or the v. Okay, so tell them, put your teeth on your lip, or put your tongue between your teeth. Okay, show them what to do, and then they'll be able to get the hang of it much more easily. Common sounds. So this is to do with sound recognition. So poor sound recognition is really problematic for students, and you find this at B2 level when they're doing the listening and they have to write down certain words because the sound recognition is just not there. So sound recognition is also where you can bring in the IPA. So you might have two different sounds, or you might have words related to a sound. They have to go find different words. If it has one sound, they categorize it and put it with one sound, if not with the other. And so it's all about getting them involved and getting them listening for the different sounds. Matching sounds, running and touching sounds, categorizing sounds, odd one out, putting things on the board in different categories. And you can use the words that come in the book. Okay, so take what you're using, take a text that you're reading, extract different words and categorize those in terms of a particular sound that you know students might struggle with. such as our j, for example. Syllables. Syllables are a big issue for many of our learners, and I think one of the biggest differences you can make to your students is to work on the distinction of syllables in English. We can use our fingers. Okay, how many syllables does comfortable have? 3. Okay, so showing them, okay, and then showing them where the strong one is. So we've got comfortable, sorry, the other way around, comfortable. Okay, so we can use this as well for our students. Show them, clap, put the bubbles on the board. Syllables are one of the ways, the very, very easy ways that you can work with pronunciation in class. It's a big, big help to students, but make it visual. Fingers, bubbles on the board, lots of different things like that. Make it physical, okay? As we've said, pronunciation is physical. Get them to move, okay? Get them to use their language whilst they're moving around. We're very often, when we're speaking, we're not sitting still like this, okay? So try and mimic how they're going to be using their physicality outside the classroom as well when they're speaking. So here, running dictations, focusing on the mouth and the body, standing up, sitting down, categorizing, speaking to each other. It has to be something that's physical because it's a physical activity. It's not a cognitive activity. Broken telephone. Okay, so often referred to as Chinese whispers, but we can't say that anymore. So broken telephone. It's really, really useful. So here we can get students to send messages from one side to another. We can send, okay, either for them to write on the board, we can get them to deliver a message so that a student has to do something, to touch a flashcard. At any level, we can use broken telephone. And it's great because there is an element of you have to be successful in your pronunciation in order to go from the beginning to the end, in order to produce it correctly for the other student to understand. Okay, do silly examples, make it memorable for them. Okay, and in that way they'll remember it more. But when there's a direct goal for the pronunciation and for the message, students are more likely to make more of an effort. Okay, and number 10. Images are really strong with pronunciation. Okay, so associate a sound with a word, a sound with an image. Okay, like I had in the IPA, you've got a tree for E. Okay, you've got a fish for I. Association for visuals and sounds is really strong because then automatically your brain creates connections. Another thing you could do is have images of words that are difficult for students to produce. You could put them in a pot and you could take them out to practice at different stages of the lesson, as a warmer, as a filler. Okay, you could challenge students to do 5 in a row, take out the picture, how do I pronounce this word? For example, you've got animals, bear, goat. These words are difficult for students to produce. So have images in a little pot, get them to take them out. Ooh, how do I pronounce this word? And you're working on pronunciation along with vocabulary. And remember, visuals are very, very strong and it aids the memory a lot. So this will make a really strong connection with the sound and the pronunciation focus. And lastly, we should always praise our students' success, okay? It's something which in pronunciation, sometimes we go forward and then take 2 steps back. But we must always celebrate the success of our students, okay, rather than focusing always on the negatives. If you've done something really well, good pronunciation, okay, make sure you focus on that. Make sure you tell the students how they've progressed, because sometimes it can feel difficult for students, like they're fighting a bit of a losing battle with pronunciation. But it's achievable. Set them goals, okay? Let them achieve those goals and always celebrate the success that they are having in the development of their pronunciation, no matter how small. And to conclude, we need training, okay? So training which develops teachers' understanding of their roles as a speech coach, monitors learners' speech, and more importantly, provides students with ways to self-monitor. So becoming more independent users of English and recognizing their own pronunciation. We need to develop confidence in teachers, importantly, that focusing on students' pronunciation should not be considered intrusive or a punishment, but is in most cases welcomed by the students And the more we focus on it, the more welcomed it will be by our students, especially at that young age where they are so keen to just speak as much as possible. They love it. It's a game. It's nothing that they feel nervous about. So really capitalize on this with your younger students and make them feel happy and confident about their speaking. Okay, so what are you waiting for? The best time to start is now. All right, this is not something which is like, oof, I need to work on this. No, the sooner the better. Start integrating it little by little. It doesn't have to be massive activities that you do in class focusing on pronunciation. 5 minutes per lesson, focusing on difficult sounds within the words that you're focusing on in class, the grammar that you're using, working on connected speech. Little is good, and remember, little and often is going to be what will help your students in the long run. Okay, so just all that's left for me to say on this is next week you've got another webinar by Alex. Okay, so Alex is talking about authentic materials in class next week, so the same time on the 5th of June, next Friday. Again, thank you very much to Richmond for helping us and collaborating with us on this. If anybody's got any questions now, they can type it into the chat. If you want the slides, again, I said I'm very, very happy to send you the PDF of all the slides. If you just email me, karen@london-school.com, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have or send you the PDF of the slides, because I know it's a lot to take on board in just 1 hour, which isn't really that much time. Okay, so thank you very much for attending. Again, if you have any questions, please, please, please do let me know. Send me an email. And if not, have a fantastic sunny day. And I will see you in a couple of weeks. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.